Hi there, thanks for joining me today. I'm Anah. If this is your first visit, welcome to the Labyrinth. If you're a returning visitor, thank you so much for joining us again. I just want to give you the thumbs up or the heads up or whatever that I had a hope to actually get more content, more numbers onto the video, but obviously it's taken me a lot longer to get through the number ones and just to do a bit of an introduction here. So yes, it's going to take me more than one. I'm sort of suspecting it may take about 10 videos to actually get through the content for the birth chart, but I will do my best, okay? I'll try not to fluff it out and drag it out too much. In the meantime, I'm not going to waffle on here. I'm just going to say, look, let's get into it. Let's start talking about it. But thank you for being part of my journey. So before we get too far into it, I just want to make the point that while the birth chart is very important and it does speak to the power that is identified through numbers on the chart, sometimes when we look at a birth chart, it appears to be weak. However, the reality, the importance of the content on the chart is not so much what is shown, but rather what is missing. Because when we have missing or gaps on the birth chart, it shows qualities that a person can develop as part of their personal and professional development, and they can do this through perseverance. And you will find that many very successful people have actually been born with what is referred to as a weak birth chart. So I just want to make sure that people are aware of that before we go on. And I want to make the point also that there is nobody that has got this perfectly balanced birth chart. And this is why, well, it's not just because of this, but you wouldn't do a numerology report based purely on the birth chart, using that as a form of analysis of a person's personality. You would be looking at the astro influences, the influences of the ruling number, the day number. These all add extra information about a person's strengths, their character strengths, and any vulnerabilities for development. So we'll take a look at the chart in a moment so that you can fully understand. Well, not fully understand. You won't fully understand until we actually get through the series, but it will make more sense as we progress. Now, I would encourage you, please, at this point, to go and grab a piece of paper and a pen, because there's going to be a really simple activity here for you to help to understand the energy of numbers and how it works and how it relates to you personally. So if you want to put this video on pause right now, grab yourself a piece of pen and paper. I'm going to ask you the question and we'll look at this further in the video. Just the question is, what do you think if I can speak, what do you actually think the temperature is where you're sitting right now? Okay, just think on that. What do you think it is? I'm not going to tell you anything. Just think, what is the temperature where you're sitting right now, and write it down. And we'll come back to the answer in the future. Pause the video if you need to. So before we look at what you wrote down, we're going to have a look at this little chart here. This is the example, and you will have seen me use it if you've watched the other videos. On the birth chart, you have the three planes, which are mind, spirit, and body, okay? And they are always in that order. If you decide to do calculations, this is essential, okay? This is the critical part of the chart. Now, I've put the words beginning, middle, and end up there just to help you to understand the process of the numerology chart. Now, for your information as well, some people refer to this as the tic-tac-toe method of numerology, I believe. That's not something that I refer to it as. To me, it's just the birth chart. But just so that you get a bit of understanding when you're doing birth charts for people, when we refer to the mind plane, we're referring to a person's beliefs, the thoughts, the ideas, and it's called the thinking plane, okay? The spirit plane refers to emotions, feelings, spirituality, and intuition, and the body plane refers to the earthly and physical aspects of life. It's the tangible doing type stuff. So the reason I put beginning, middle, and end is because at the beginning we're referred to, they are gateway numbers. Sorry, I'm stumbling on my words a bit. The numbers in the first column are referred to gateways to the planes, and we will be talking about this more as we look at the specific numbers on the chart. So just remember the question I asked you before about the temperature, that wasn't a test. This is purely for you to heighten your own personal awareness in a concrete way. Take a look at the answer that you wrote down, because that's going to reveal something to you. What did you write? Did you decide to go, oh, I estimate it to be Celsius or Fahrenheit? Or did you write simply, well, it's a bit warm, or it's a bit stinking hot, or whatever? Okay, you will have done one or the other. Don't change it, right? Because, as I say, it's not important what you wrote down. It's just helping to unearth an aspect of yourself that you may not be aware of. Now, if you wrote down that the temperature in Celsius or Fahrenheit, what this indicates is that you're a left brain person, and that you need to have logic and sound rationale to support your thinking. So you, yeah, you would be more into the evidence-based stuff. If, on the other hand, that you wrote down, well, it's a bit warm or it's a bit cold or whatever, then you are what is called right brain, the opposite. So you're a feelings person. You would be more inclined to rely on your intuition. So to break it down a bit more, a rational person, this is how they express their unique individuality, soundly, logically, okay? The feelings person, they express their individuality through their sensitivity to the energy and their environment. A rational and logical person is going to use words and information. They'll be able to have an impartial discussion, so shall we say, without becoming overly emotional. And they will probably, if they're trying to navigate problems, they will probably have a conversation where they don't rely on their emotions as descriptors of what's going on. It's very, very rational. Whereas for the emotional person, when they're trying to navigate problems, they would probably open up sentences with things like, well, I feel. Whereas the logical person would start with, well, I think, okay? Now, obviously, we all know that there's got to be a balance between thought and emotions anyway. But the difference between the numerology or numbers is that they actually don't balance. They are either one or the other. They are either masculine energy, that rational, logical aspect, or they are considered to be feminine energy. And if you're offended by terms, I'm just going to say, look, this is the way it is. It's been there for thousands of years. We're talking about energy, not gender choices. So anyway, when it comes to the feelings people, that's considered to be the feminine, reliant on the energies of emotion, sensitivities, and intuition. And this is why when we are looking at things like the birth chart, you wouldn't stick purely to the birth chart, because the birth chart might say focus, for example, and you will see this because I'll give you some examples. A birth chart might show a person as having primarily masculine type numbers on their chart, and we could be forgiven looking at that chart for thinking, well, this person obviously is all logic, rational, and all the rest of it. But the reality is they might actually be a Scorpio with their astro. They may have their ruling number or their day number may actually be highly sensitive, and that will balance out any of the traits that occur on the birth chart. So this is all part of informing the individuality. There are other influences as well, and I'll talk to them in a moment. So when you're doing your birth charts, basically there is a space and place for every single number on the chart, and it doesn't shift, it doesn't move. Okay, the 3 is always going to be in the spot for the 3 on the mind plane. That's the gateway to the mind, a gateway to the conscious self, to thought, understanding and awareness. When it comes to the spiritual plane, that's referred to also as the higher self plane. The 2 is the gateway to being able to access intuitive gifts. When we're talking about the body, we're talking about the basic self. This is the part of us that you might say is behind the veil, if that's a descriptor that you use. That part where we're not actually consciously aware of our gifts. We're just functioning on the earth plane, doing the material day-to-day living. But we all need to be doing something actively towards our own survival, if nothing else. And that is reflected on the body plane with the number one. Now, did I say you will never ever see a birth chart like this? And this is where the first slide, where I've got the business of, it's not so much the power of the chart. When we look at the numbers of the chart, the gaps are what is really important as far as the life path and numerology goes, because they convey messages in themselves. And this is stuff that we're going to discuss as well. But however, when it comes to analysing the chart, let's say that you did get a chart such as this, which you won't. I just want to clarify, you will never ever see a chart like this. You could look on here and you would establish the weightiest in the column with the totals. The weightiest plane based on this chart is actually the mind plane. So this would suggest that the person is quite steeped in thought. They may actually be an overthinker, depending on what else they've got in their charts. And that could be a disadvantage too, depending on what else is there. It could be analysis, paralysis by analysis, because they're very analytical. On the other hand, the person that has got the 2, 5, and 8 across there, that's obviously... Actually, do you know what? Just think about this. This would actually, in a perfect world, actually, yes, this would be very good, because it would be a bridging of the mind and spirit with the practical application on the earth plane. So just a little bit of trivia, by the way. I can't help but flick into that. Where else? What else can I say here? Basically, just when you do your charts, this is all you've got to remember. Okay, mind, spirit, body, and that the numbers have columns. They've all got their correct place. Then the next thing that we look at with birth charts, because this is not standalone, nothing is ever standalone, is we have arrows on the birth chart. And I will explain that in a moment. There are so many arrows, or potential for arrows, on the birth charts that it actually is not going to be possible to do them, I don't think, until the end of me delivering all the content about the numbers and the significance of having multiple numbers on the birth chart, absent numbers, isolated numbers, and all of that. And then I'll do a video directly on the meaning of each arrow. But they are actually hugely important as far as identifying strengths and challenges for a person across their life path. And I think you'll be really interested to see that content. I know that I'll enjoy sharing it with you. So we'll start by looking at number one. And I thought, just for the heck of it, I'm going to put little imaginary birth dates in here that show multiple numbers in one spot, as you see here, so that you get a really good idea. It will actually make sense to you as to what's going on with the millennials as well, and why they have, I need to be mindful here, why life can be so challenging for them currently, So if we look at this particular chart, what I've done is I've given a birth date of the 11th of November 2011, and what we can see here is this person has 6 number ones on their birth chart. And the funny thing is, in the last millennia, that would be very, very unusual for that to happen. Fortunately, they have a 2, thank God for that. But if you look at the rest of the chart, there's absolutely all these spaces. They're missing a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And this is all going to carry meaning down the track. We'll look at all of this stuff, okay? But for now, we're going to focus on the number one. Now, the number one is basically the divine expression. It's an absolute number, and you will have seen from previous videos that a person cannot have a ruling number or a primary pathway, because that's what we call it as well, as the number one. However, they can have it as a day number, okay? Because obviously you can be born on the 1st of any month. So that's why you can have a day number of 1. But anyway, going back to it, it is about, or the power of it is that it rules the capacity of divine expression and communication across all of the planes. And remember, the planes are body, spirit, and mind. It's what we call a macro, and it's the number of divine ego. So technically speaking, if a person actually did have a ruling number of 1, They probably, I don't know, might be a guru sitting out there on a mountain or whatever. But anyway, back to the charts. It's the first physical number on the earth plane, the body plane. As I said, it's the only absolute number. It symbolizes a person's capacity to express, and this is verbally, or rather verbal self-expression. It's considered to be a key to the communication abilities, and it refers to the way a person interacts with the outside world. And when we talk about that, we're talking about the way that they show themselves and how they also respond or react with other people. So the number 1 actually does indicate, this is if it was a 1 on its own, a degree of personal control or lack of, okay? Let me think. Just for a moment though, okay, so that's the number 1, that's the basis. If there was one only number 1 on the birth chart, that's what we could assume, but multiple numbers carry extra meanings as well, and we'll be looking at those. But just for now, I'm going to reflect on this birth date that we can see here, the 11th. You could be forgiven at a glance for thinking that this person actually has no intellectual capacity, okay, because there's nothing on the mind plane. However, the arrows come into play here, because that would indicate, if I put an arrow up there on the mind plane, the fact that there's no numbers in there actually reflects poor memory. And so a parent would be advised to work with their child, if it's was born on the 11th of November, to do memory games with them to try and develop their memory recall. They also have on this chart the arrow of frustrations, which is unrealistic expectations of people, to be honest. They've got high values and expectations because they've got their own sense of morality of what's important to them, and they become very frustrated and disappointed when people don't hold the same values, or they get let down easily. I can't remember what the third arrow would be, but I'm not talking about arrows really right now. I'm just trying to give you an example of what we would interpret looking at this birth chart. We can see that actually they would be quite sensitive, and the sensitivity, I wouldn't say super sensitive though, because they've only got the 1, 2, and they've got all of those ones. I think if they were female gender, talking about gender, they tend to have heightened sensitivity, shall we say. So if a person has got a single 2 and they're a female, it's potentially more likely that they may actually pay attention to their intuition and not be too sensitive. But you would look at a whole heap of other things with this. I'm going to move on to talk about what it means when you've got 2 1s on the birth chart. So if a person's got just one number 1 on the birth chart, this indicates that they may struggle with verbal expression as before. It doesn't mean that they can't express. It's simply that when they're trying to convey their real and genuine and authentic feelings, it can be a real struggle for them. However, the verbal communication gifts, they are demonstrated when they're talking about conversations or talking about things that don't involve their feelings. They can be really good public speakers, but if the conversation was to revert to, well, how do you feel, that can be very disadvantageous to them, because it takes them a while and the development of maturity for them to be able to master their responses to these types of questions. And that includes the development of self-awareness that comes through maturity as well. So we can be very solid in the fact that self-expression doesn't come easily to them if there's just one number 1 on the birth chart. Now, the flip side of this, if we're talking about negative traits, is they may, when living negatively, say things that are contradictory to what they think or mean, and it can come across as quite aggressive, and it's an internal self-defense mechanism. But make no mistake, the words are designed to hurt and offend, because they are trying to protect themselves. They feel threatened. So this is not all, okay? This is some people. This is what happens when they haven't actually learned to raise some of that self-awareness and process, that self-development stuff that we talk about. So they will potentially until they learn to overcome this experience, many intense and heated debates, until they learn to think before they speak, and when they start to take deliberate and conscious charge or command of the words that they use, because there is truth to the old saying that the spoken word, once it's been said, it can't be retracted. And while the intention would be to hurt a person when they use these hurtful words, I don't believe that their intention is actually for it to wound the other person so deeply. But of course, once they've let those words out, that's it. You may as well say forked tongue. The words are out, they're impossible to retract, and it may actually go very deeply into the person around them or the person that they've used the words to. Now, if you think this might be you, then it would become a case of, taking charge, taking responsibility, create your own diary, practice and rehearse. If there's something that you feel that you need to say, and it might involve an expression of emotions, then you kind of work out what it is to say. You try and say it subtly, and you actually practice. So it's not just about the words that you're going to say. You're going to look at the tone, and you could rehearse it in front of a mirror and watch your body language as well, to make sure that when you say things to people, that you're actually not sending a dual message to them, that you're speaking from your honest integrity, if you like, for the best outcomes. So the people that are born with 2 1s on their birth chart, they're blessed with this really brilliant, gifted verbal expression. You would say it's the gift of the gab, and it truly is a blessing, and they're very fortunate and lucky to have this. They are obviously advised that they should never use this gift for manipulation, or certainly they're cautioned against abusing it. At the same time, because they're so gifted and communication comes with ease to them, they may obviously demonstrate a little bit of intolerance to those of us that aren't as fortunate as what they are when it comes to this verbal expression. Now, because they're so good at communication, this verbal communication, they're able to see both sides of an argument because they can negotiate it. And of course, I'm talking about when they're living and acting positively. Now, the other spin-off thing that you might see with a person that's got the 2 1s is because they're able to negotiate and discuss, they may actually shift position and change sides in the middle of an argument. And this is because they've been able to gain clarity and new information, and because it feels right to them to actually do this shift. So it's not that they've got some kind of character flaw. It's actually a credit to them and a demonstration of their courage that they have this capacity to speak, to communicate, to identify problems, and to recognise what is a truth and what isn't, and to act with integrity. So combined with all of this is this heightened humanitarian awareness as well. If they have 3 number 1s, this is kind of an interesting birth chart, because it signifies 2 potential outcomes with a person. They may be this chatterbox, very bright, very interesting, lots of various activities, and a life full of fun, and where they love to verbally share their enjoyment with those people around them. So you've got that type of personality there can be exhibited. But then there's another group of people that are the total opposite. And the reason why they're opposite is because there's other influences on the birth chart. So if they've got certain arrows, then they can become hypersensitive and very quiet, introspective, shy even, especially with strangers. Although once they become more comfortable with the group that they're in, they tend to become a little bit more perkier and talkative once they start to relax. Now, this demographic of people, the shy ones, they generally will express rather than verbally. They will be good at written expression because that allows them to share or to write their thoughts more freely, and they lose a lot of those inhibitions. Where there's 4 number 1s, these people are going to have, well, quite often they'll have difficulty in the verbal expression, certainly expressing in ways that they would like, and this leads to them being misunderstood quite often. And because they are misunderstood because of the struggles with this communication, it can actually bring a lot of emotional pain to them, and this heightens their sensitivity or brings them sensitivity, I guess, takes things personally or whatever. But life does teach them to hide this inner emotional turmoil behind a smile. So they tend to put the suffering, they turn it inwards until they learn to release emotions in a way that they are not identified as the emotion that they're experiencing. I'm not sure if I've clarified that right. I guess the best way of explaining it is to say that, yes, they hide those emotions until they can express it in a way that they are not exhibiting the emotion, so you can't mistake them. If a person turns around and says, I'm sad, quite often you can see I'm sad in the behaviour. So for them, they want to be able to say, I've been sad or I am sad, as opposed to looking sad. I guess that's the best way to describe it. For this group, it would be really important that they identify the level of connection that they have with the people that they're speaking to, if they're wanting to share their feelings, not necessarily thoughts, but certainly if they want to speak about their feelings, they would need to establish that that person is trustworthy, that that person hears and understands them and doesn't judge them for their feelings, and that will encourage them to release some of these inhibitions. Now, there is a bit of a caution with this as well. So this is for parents. This is where the parental information comes in. Some people who don't actually learn these skills when they're a young child or going into adolescence and all the rest of it, because of this being misunderstood, they may actually turn to addictions such as alcohol or drugs for a short-term fix. And obviously this is going to create further difficulties for them. And, especially if you've got an arrow of poor memory on your chart as well as the 4 ones, then there is an increased risk of dementia as they age, apparently. I say apparently because that's just information that I've read, but I actually don't have any experience of observing this. The only date, actually, no, there's probably more than that I was going to say that I can think of where there might be more than 5 or more ones on a birth chart. I was actually initially thinking the 11th of November 2015, but that's actually not correct. It would be the 11th of, over the next century, the 11th of November, any year ending with a 1. It could be 21, it could be 2031, things like that. This is when this is going to come into play, the 5 numbers. So it will happen very rarely, and thank God for that, I would imagine the poor people that have got it on their chart would be saying, because it does represent an extreme imbalance and suppression that compounds the difficulties talked about on the previous slide of being able to verbally express emotions and feelings. And this consequently can lead to them being really sad at young people, because obviously it's going to impact on their capacity to have relationships with people, and that lends itself obviously to loneliness. So the loneliness once again will compound unless it's addressed early, so parents need to bear this in mind. It becomes this vicious cycle of being misunderstood, feeling lonely, becoming more sensitive to other people's reactions and responses. And then through this loneliness, there's the tendency to become more isolated and attending to themselves and their own interests. So they can start to demonstrate or exhibit obsessive tendencies, especially about their appearance and their actions. They might become really insecure, and it's likely they'll have lots of mirrors around the home, not necessarily in an open space as people would like to think. Well, actually, let me rephrase, not that people would like to think, rather they would be inclined to be concerned that people would think that they're vain because they're secretly staring at themselves on a regular basis. But this is not about vanity, this is more about insecurity. So the advice would be, if it becomes a real psychological imbalance, they need to be able to distract themselves from some of these quirky negative traits and to shift their consciousness beyond the physical and into the higher levels. And that might be through the arts or whatever, and something where they can see the results of their actions fairly quickly, and probably creating things of beauty. So art or sculpting or whatever might be an activity that they'll fall into. In a way, this particular slide's a bit of a joke because you're never going to see an isolated one on a birth chart over the next 1,000 years, because we're in the 21st century. And an isolated one occurs, if you look at this chart, you can see it's missing a 2, 4, and the 5, right? So even if they were missing the 4 and the 5, they're always going to have a 2 over the next 1,000 years, because we're in the 21st century, like I said. So this is how an isolated one occurs. And when a person's got an isolated one, basically, especially if the numbers are concentrated on the mind plane, the person can be perceived to be lazy or unreliable, because they spend so much time in their head that they tend to put no thoughts into action. They're dreamers, you know what I mean? They're off with the fairies all the time. They're not walking the talk or walking the thought, if we want to put it that way. So having said that, while others might perceive them to be lazy and unreliable, they actually won't have any idea that this is what's happened. I mean, you might see people in the last century that have got a isolated one, if you're doing numerology on older people, shall we say, but they can actually correct any imbalance just by obviously dedicating effort to developing the attributes of the 2, 5, and 4, which we're going to talk about as we get to those numbers. But this is about love and compassion and learning to express feelings rather than bottling them up. You might see birth charts that actually don't have a number 1 on them, and this is what we call an absent 1 or an absent number. Where the 1 is the number that's absent, it's actually not really a bad thing, because it tends to indicate shifting from the ego or egocentricity to a more compassionate and improved intuition. And this is combined with the planetary and environmental consciousness. So, you know, it's not really a bad thing at all to have this absence on your chart. So I thought I would finish off this video with just a little bit of a fun exercise or activity and show you what a completed chart, not to be mistaken for a completed report, looks like, by looking at Prince George, because one day he's going to be a world leader simply because of his birth. So, you know, what does his chart say about him and his capacity to lead in the future? Well, I think we can start with the fact that, actually, I'm going to speak fast now because obviously the video is getting long. To start with, he has a master number, or as his day number, actually, that's the 22-4. I encourage you to go back and take a look at what a 24 actually means. But he's going to be quite the visionary. And while this is the secondary path, it actually refers to he's going to have good business ideas, and he'll also have the capacity to see both sides of a story. Now, in regard to the ruling number, he's actually an 8. So I consider this number to be one of the manifesta, where he will actually have a bit of a Midas touch anyway. Whatever he wants, he will be able to bring about. And not just because he's going to be the future king, because people with the 8 have this quality anyway. Providing he's got good parenting, which I think that he has based on what we've seen in the media about his parents' social concerns, he will also have a humanitarian consciousness, and he will take responsibility. Now, he's also born as a Leo, what's it called? Leo Cancer cusp, okay? Now, that's going to bring some sensitivity to it, heightened sensitivity, but because he's got that passion of the Leo, he's going to be able to have a bit of a work ethic as well, and probably even a workaholic based on all the other stuff we've got going around for him. So far, I would say his chart is looking good as far as being a leader goes, so far, right? And his charts in themselves, now we're going to look directly at the chart. It's actually very well balanced. It's 6, 6, and 8. And you want somebody that can actually think and bridge, you know, not only think humanitarian thoughts, but actually have compassion and empathy to people, and who has that capacity to put these beautiful ideas into practical implementation. So it's looking pretty good here. He's got a lot of missing numbers, though, on that chart, if you take a look at it. In the first instance, the 7 is actually isolated. That's going to carry a message. I'll talk to that in a minute. But he's also missing the numbers 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9. Now, there's going to be some balance with that because of his birth numbers, okay? The fact that he's missing an 8 on his chart is really not important because he's got the ruling number 8. Other conclusions I can make looking at this, or, hazard an educated or informed guess, is that he'll be quite impatient and intolerant to people that he thinks jumps to conclusions and don't ask questions before they make decisions. And he would likely be even intolerant towards people who choose to ignore their intuition, because he's definitely going to be intuitive, if I can say the word, and from my perspective, spiritual. And this puts him in a good place to be the leader of the church or the protector of the church. However, I'm going to put something here that I'm not sure that his own religious faith or values will be completely aligned with the Anglican values, because he's got other indicators in his birth chart, such as the 0, and there's indications that he actually could be quite psychic himself with the capacity to see spirit. So I imagine he would have strong spiritual values, but he might not be as, and no offense meant to people, as rigid as some Anglican folk, but given his role, he will need to be very discreet about where he would have those conversations. There's also the recommendation that he actually get involved in a creative outlet, probably such as what his grandfather does, doing art or gardening, as a form of therapeutic release for him, because he's going to have to consciously apply himself to being organised and structured as part of achieving his goals. The lack of the 9 in his instance is a good thing, because it refers to his ability and capacity to make healthy, good, mature, responsible decisions that will benefit the whole of humanity, not inhumanity, like I just about said. Okay, the isolated 7. Now, this is quite interesting, because the 7 does refer to sacrifice and loss, and where he will do most of his learning from loss, and not necessarily the first time that there's a loss. Now, when we're talking about loss in this particular context, I believe we're talking about the loss of loved ones and family members, and we've actually already seen that happen. He's lost both of his grandparents. I would imagine he was quite close to the Queen and Prince Philip, and then we've seen the relationship breakdown between him and Prince Harry, and I believe that, if we can believe the media reports, that he'd previously been quite close to Prince Harry, so that becomes another loss. I'm not sure that he had time to form a relationship with his cousin, but that would become another loss. The interesting thing, though, is because of his chart, whatever losses that he experiences, he will have the attitude that the losses were fate, and realistically, of course, they are. His great-grandparents were elderly. It was, going to happen. Okay, the guidance for him would be that he will need to learn to ask for help. When he starts to feel overwhelmed emotionally, he needs to be comfortable to ask for help, and the other thing is to develop his intuition and to apply it in practical ways to his life. Now, the arrows I'm going to try and brief over, they kind of compensate for some of the stuff that's on his chart. The green one is the arrow of the planner, so that compensates for the goal setting. It gives him a bit of strength there, because it's about an organised approach to life, and that compensates for this missing 8. The blue arrow is the arrow of frustrations, and this speaks to him being frustrated by people because he's continually let down. Now, to put this into perspective, when this arrow comes into play, this is quite a virtuous thing for him. It represents the fact that he's got quite high morals, and he probably has this attitude of do unto others, and he would expect other people to share his moral, because it's virtuous, his moral compass, and that's what leads to the frustration, because people being people, they inevitably disappoint people and fail to live up to expectations. So his parents and his nanny they would need to spend a lot of time reminding him to accept people for who and what they are and not to expect too much of them, but rather to appreciate it when they surprise him as being reliable, because that will prevent him from experiencing so much frustration and disappointment. Realistically, it's not wrong to hope that people will meet your high standards, but sometimes if the standards are too high, then it can ask too much of people, and everybody works within their own capacity. So that was just a little bit of fun, I hope, for you. So I'm going to call this to a close now because it's got very long. But next week we'll start by looking at number 2, and we'll just see how I go, if I can get through as many as I can, because that's the aim. So what I'm going to do now is say thank you very much for being part of this journey. I hope I've given you something to think about, something that you've enjoyed, and I shall catch you next week or on the next video. Take care. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye for now.